John, it's an honor and a pleasure to welcome you back to Tuscaloosa. I hope you're doing well.
I couldn't be better, Ryan. How are you?
John, I obviously, we want to talk with you a lot of different things and sort of get your opinion. Let me start off with what you think George Godsey would bring to the University of Alabama. And in fact, if he's the guy, we've got some reports here from Bama Online that he has been interviewed for the job. I'd love to get your thoughts.
Well, first of all, I'm a big George Godsey fan. I covered him the last 3 years. And I'll say if Nick Saban hired George, he's talked to Bill Belichick about him because George worked with Bill for 4 years. And they called him tight ends coach, but he had a lot to do with Tom Brady. When the Texans played the Patriots in the playoffs, Brady went on and on about Goose. We didn't even know Godsey's nickname was Goose. And then before we could call him Goose, he got fired. He was kind of a scapegoat because Brock Osweiler played so bad. I think they did him a favor by doing it because they said it was a mutual parting of the ways, and they did him a favor so he didn't have to coach Osweiler again. But I think, Saban doesn't hire bad coaches. And he would get great recommendation from Tom Brady, Bill Belichick, and then Texans coach Bill O'Brien, who's been with George since George was quarterback at Georgia Tech, and Bill was a TA, and they've been together. So I think George would be good. They were terrible at quarterback this year. It was not Godsey's fault. Last year, and I'll give you an example, and if George was hired, I'll tell you more, but George took these 4 quarterbacks, Brian Hoyer, Ryan Mallett, Brandon Whedon, and T.J. Yates. And he got them 28 touchdowns, 12 interceptions, and they went 9-7, won the AFC South. And he did a terrific job. And then this year, with Osweiler, he had 15 touchdowns, 16 interceptions. And everybody wanted to blame it on Godsey. And I said, what do you think? He just went brain dead as a coach in an off season. He had a lobotomy where he couldn't coach. It wasn't Godsey, it was Osweiler.
Well, let me ask you about that, because here in Tuscaloosa, they evaluate college football right now, they know everything about George Godsey. They've studied him, and you got to love a fan base that has that much passion. And a lot of people have brought it up. Well, he didn't do that well there at Houston. And John, I think that's a myth. I think he did, as you said, very well there. Brock Osweiler was a big miss. And I'm not sure if it's going to work out there in Houston.
They took over a 2-14 team, and they've had 3 consecutive 9-7 records. They've won 2 divisions and 1 playoff game, and they lost the playoff games, Kansas City 2 years ago here, in which Brian Hoyer had the worst playoff game in history, and they didn't bring him back. And then this year with Osweiler. So Brock Osweiler and Brian Hoyer being here was not George Godsey's decision. So I would think that the fans of the Crimson Tide would have a little trust in Nick Saban based on what Nick has done. To me, have a little faith.
What do you think would be a specialist there on the offensive side of the football? What do you think he would know best as far as what type of offensive mind would he bring?
Well, first of all, George is a former quarterback. He's very smart. He paid his dues in college, and then he went to the NFL with the Patriots. Then he came here. He worked for 2 organizations that didn't have a losing record while he was with them, and he's adaptable. And I'll give you guys a good example about George Godsey. Now, I hope your listeners are paying close attention here. 2 years ago, the Texans lost their 2 starting quarterbacks in the same game, and they were warming up their punter, Shane Leckler, hadn't thrown a pass since high school. And they ran it, and the clock was run out by the Colts. So they had 2 games left and no quarterback. So they called a quarterback they cut in preseason, Case Keenum. Case was on the practice squad of the Rams, and he was deer hunting when his agent called. And his agent said, they need you. They got an SOS for you to come home to Houston, where he started at the University of Houston. So he goes, okay. So Case Keenum comes back here, and with a week to prepare, they were, I believe, 14-point underdogs to Baltimore, which was going to the playoffs. So they beat them They beat them bad. Case had a great game. So here's what good coaching is in my mind. When he got cut because he couldn't handle at 6 foot the system that Bill O'Brien and George Godsey played. George plays Bill O'Brien's system, which is the Patriots system. So they got together and said on the plane back, we've got to watch his film at the University of Houston. We've got to tailor what we do to him to get through these last 2 games instead of trying to get him to do what we want. And they did. They watched film, came up with a game plan, beat the Ravens, beat the Jaguars, finished 9-7, and lost the playoff spot to the Ravens on the last day. Last year, 2015, T.J. Yates was signed off as sofa in Atlanta with a cup of coffee because of injuries. He came in here. They go to Cincinnati. Bengals are unbeaten, national TV, prime time. T.J. comes off the bench, throws a winning touchdown pass, and he went on and on about Georgia's simplified game plan. And then the one that's the most telling, Brandon Whedon was cut by the Cowboys. He was 0-3 as a starter. He comes here and goes 2-0. When he first got here, he said, this playbook is like reading Chinese backward compared to what I just did, meaning the Cowboys. So he goes 2-0, and people say, well, how can you read Chinese backward? How do you do that? He said, nope. He said, George Godsey had this game plan, and we went over every play that he wanted. If I didn't like it, we threw it out. He made sure I was comfortable with everything. And there was only one play that I didn't like, and he said, I think you can do it. And I said, well, leave it in then. And he called it, it worked, and Whedon said, yep, you were right. So that's what George Godsey did that impressed me. And this year, I'll guarantee you, he got a raw deal having to coach Osweiler and then getting blamed for it because it was not Godsey throwing all those interceptions. It was not Godsey throwing behind receivers and things like that.
When I look at the departure there in Houston, what happened? I mean, what was it? What you called him a scapegoat there? What happened? How did it go down?
Well, the fans and media were going crazy, blasting the offense, blasting Osweiler, blasting George, blasting O'Brien. You wouldn't think they won a playoff game and got beat in the second round at New England. And they were 1 score down in the fourth quarter. They played the Patriots better than the Steelers did. But people were they wanted somebody. They wanted somebody. So it was George. And like I said earlier, they did him a favor.
So just to put it, you think the type of offensive mind that he would bring would be similar to what we saw in the Super Bowl with New England?
That's what they do, but he's going to adjust that offense. You know, the offense that Jalen runs is not what the Patriots do. He would adjust what he does to fit your quarterback in your offense. He's not going to make them do what he wants. That's not good coaching.
Well, and I think that's the real issue. When the reason why we want to get you on to help us understand George Godsey, but when you look at quarterback, Alabama's got to have a quarterback coach that can groom these guys, invest in them. You've got a true sophomore and now 2 true freshmen on campus. And Nick Saban has been quoted that he would like to get back to some of that pro set physical type of brand, a combination of the spread, but getting back to some of that physical brand of football.
Well, if he said that, then that's one reason Nick's interested in George.
Yeah, and that's I think you can connect the dots. I'm not sure exactly which way the Nick Saban will go, but if Bill Belichick will give George Godsey a big boost, well, I mean, Nick Saban would have never brought him here I don't think if he really truly didn't have an interest.
No, if he didn't already check out George, he wouldn't have been there. And that's not just if he didn't talk to Brady or Brady texted him, then Belichick has told him, well, Tom thinks this too, because if you got Belichick and Brady or hiring somebody, that's a pretty good endorsement, especially this week.
John McClain, let me ask you how, when you cover this transition from college to pro and the up-tempo offense, the no-huddle, how is that affecting the transition from college to pro and the evaluation process that we're in the part of right now?
has affected wide receivers. It's affected offensive linemen, especially tackles, and of course, the most it's affected the quarterback. It's affected the true blocking tight ends because they don't line up as inline blockers anymore. The ones that do that are good line up in the slot, sometimes outside. You don't see your traditional tight end who's a great blocker and a good receiver like Mark Navarro or John Mackey, somebody like that. And that's okay because it's harder to cover a tight end. And you guys got the best one in the country. He's going to be a first-round pick, and he fills that bill. But the offensive tackles now, they don't run block anymore. They're always in an up stance because they're pass blocking so much. Quarterbacks don't have as many reads. You know, Florida State, Stanford, Wisconsin, those schools still play the pro-style offense, and if they have a good quarterback, they think they're easier to evaluate. Based on Dak Prescott and Marcus Mariota coming from spread system as opposed to Jameis Winston coming from a pro system, I think they've dispelled the myth that these guys can't play for a couple of years. If you get good coaching and you give them what they're capable of doing and don't try to make them do something they're not at the early age, they can be successful. That is just good coaching.
What do you think about Deshaun Watson? I've heard a lot of criticism from him, but I trust your opinion. What do you think about Deshaun Watson?
Well, here's what I know about Deshaun Watson. I've watched him carve up Alabama's great defense and Nick Saban's defense and all those number one picks for the last 2 years. And everybody looks for flaws. They don't talk about strengths. They talk about flaws. And sometimes I say it's like finding a pimple on Beyonce. You know, you're just nitpicking. And I would love to see Watson there when the Texans pick, but he'll be long gone. And I would imagine if anybody calls Nick and says, hey, what do you think about this kid? He's going to get a pretty good endorsement.
If you were building a defensive side of the football and I offered you Myles Garrett or Jonathan Allen, how would you build your defense around either one of those players?
Two totally different players. You know, Allen can play anywhere, but you want him to tackle, where Myles Garrett has been the number one prospect all year. They'll be the first two defensive linemen. Garrett would be an ideal weak side rusher in Cleveland's new 4-3, coached by Greg Williams. And then Allen, I'm not sure where he would go, hopefully to a 4-3 team where he could play inside and use his quickness and not have to be somebody who grabs and holds before he can rush. But I think those would be the first two linemen to go. Both will be gone in the top five.
Let me ask you about Reuben Foster, your thoughts about the alpha dog from this past year's team.
I saw something on the internet today saying he was the best prospect in the draft. You don't see linebackers going up that high anymore unless they're ferocious 3-4 outside pass rushers. So he'll be the first linebacker. You know, he's ideally suited to be in the inside. He's great in everything. Somebody was comparing him to Luke Kuechly. He'll be a top 10 pick. That's the thing. It's amazing to me how the Alabama just keeps spitting out all these great prospects. And we're talking about defensive guys here, which makes Watson's performance even more impressive.
Hey, John, thanks again for coming on and talking about George Godsey. I'm going to take what you said, and I'm going to help the Alabama fans get sold to George Godsey. His dad.
My pleasure. And if they hire him, call me back, and I'll be happy to repeat it again.
Well, I'm going to add something to your segment here, and I think this is where Alabama fans are going to buy completely in. George's dad played for Bear Bryant.
Can't beat that now. You know how those fans love him next to the Bear.